ascendancy back in the day. Nevertheless, it's part of the built heritage and they should have been preserved. Lord Massey's house up in Massey's estate. Apparently, you probably all have read If Those Trees Could Speak, a wonderful book that's been written about Massey's. I think there's going to be a lecture on the subject here sometime. Probably has been in the past. But the last Lord Massey apparently was a very dissolute and degenerate type of person who had mortgaged the place so heavily, he was massively in debt and could never redeem it, and he lived in the Gate Lodge, and he just allowed the place to degenerate and fall asunder. And after he left, the place simply went downhill and became derelict, and it's now demolished. But if you can go up there today, you can see the outline of the house and part of the beautiful gardens. The Massey family were into planting a lovely arboretum, a whole variety of trees of all various sorts, and thankfully I think the whole thing's been taken over now and managed by Quilcha, as far as I know. It was in grave danger of being very, very badly damaged, I think, at one stage. Again, with this house here, this was probably one of the oldest houses standing in Dublin, Old Bawn House. Now, I don't remember seeing it ever, and I'm not sure when it was knocked down. I think there may have been some that's still standing in the 1870s, 1970s, am I right?
No. Yeah.
Huh? Yeah. Old Bawn House.
It was gone.
Go ahead.
There was one actually, about 1968, I remember walking up along Leyland, and there was the ruins of that house.
I've been told that.
About 68,
a couple of people that live in town have told me that they saw it. I have no recollection of seeing it, and I thought I knew all of the antiquities around the place. Well, it was a fine big house. It was a 17th century house, and more's the pity now that it wasn't preserved in some way or another. I think the only bit of it that's left now, two bits of it left. I think there's a stone wall just before you turn up for Aylesbury, that was part of it.
This fireplace.
Fireplace is in the
Yeah, and the coming to the fireplace now. Yeah. But there's some wonderful features on it. That's a fireplace. It's actually made from, it's plasterwork, stucco of some sort. And it's I've seen it many times in Kildare Street. I don't know whether it's still there or not, or up in Collins Barracks. But it's the fireplace from Old Bawn House, and I think it depicts the building of the Tower of Babel or something like that from the Bible. Not sure exactly what it depicts. I climbed up to the top of this many times when I was a child, because this was what we knew as Timmins Castle, or Timon Castle as some people called it. We always called it Timmins Castle. I travelled the world as a young man back in the 1960s, and I remember once when I came home, going for a walk up here to have a look at it, and lo and behold, it was gone, demolished. I just couldn't believe it. It was eminently restorable, even though there was a big crack down it, and how they could just come along and whack it down in one go, it's just beyond me, with no reference to archaeological exploration or anything like that at all about it. Dreadful shame to see things like that going, I think. Thankfully that one is with us still. I say thankfully reservedly because I went to school there. That's Drumina Castle, and I don't have happy memories of going to school in the place, believe me. It was a bit like going to school in Auschwitz or somewhere. But the building's magnificent, and it was part of the school when I was there, although I didn't sit in there. I was in the new school. There were still classrooms in it, but it had been continually occupied since the time it was built, until such time as the Christian Brothers took it over as a school. And it's the only one that still has a moat around it, and it's been well restored by Peter Pearson and other people. And there's a visitor centre, and you can visit there now. Very fine one. It's a wonder they didn't knock down the round towers and all, except they had to do with Holy Catholic Ireland and nothing to do with the ascendancy, so that's probably why they left those standing, you know, knock everything else down. But when you look at that, it has hardly changed at all. As you're driving down there now, the road's probably a little bit wider, but it still looks exactly the same. You can see the chimney from, that's the Clondalkin paper mills in the distance there. It's a typical monastic site because a lot of monastic sites were circular, and you can trace the circular road around that, what would have been the monastic site, and they were also always near running water. And that's Clondalkin village that you come around today. All of that now is modern shops and houses on either side. As you can see there, it was just a little country village. But look what's up in the corner. Can you see it there? You can't actually see. You can just barely make it out there. Up in the corner. There's a sign up there, and that's what it is. was a public telephone, one of the first public telephones systems, the Bell Telephone Company. You could go in there and make a call. Very early on. That's Saggart when it was a little country village also, just up the road. And I understand that there's a plaque. In fact, I remember reading it when I was at a wedding or a baptism in there. There's a plaque in there that says that the church was built by the man that owned the Swiftbrook paper mills. It's just been refurbished recently. But that's Tallaght, very recognisable. I know some of those buildings still there. Most of them have gone now in the new buildings, but it's still very recognisable as Tallaght Village. Does anybody ever remember the forge that was just there?
Yeah.
There was the forge there and the blacksmith. I used to stand for hours looking at the blacksmith shoeing horses just beside that building. That building is still there, but just in the little recess where I think there was a butcher's, was an open door with a forge in it. And that's it looking the other direction. But there's, that's the same, yeah, some of those houses are still there. That's the tracks are on the road here for the Blessington steam tram, which must have been a great boon to travellers in bygone days. I remember reading about a great storm in 1895 when all of the roads around Tallaght, beyond Tallaght village, were impassable due to being flooded, and a man was washed away in a flash flood, a man called Nicholson, that the Blessington steam tram couldn't run. But there's a photograph of it there, wasn't it very fine? Lovely little steam engine, and this is up at the embankment. You know the way the road used to twist around in a big S-bend at the embankment? And I think that house is now gone. There was a sort of a gorge there. And this is about one of the watering stations where they used to fill up with water near the embankment. There were three classes of fares on this, first, second and third. I suppose the third class were up in the elements there, and the first class were down in the cushioners downstairs. Second class would have had wooden seats probably. Things like that defined class back then. This is down at the Terranure end. We ran from Terranure up to Blessington and later the Pool of Fuca. I think their yard was just somewhere over here that they could pull into, somewhere around there as far as I know. And I'm given to understand that that house there, which is still there, which is at an oblique angle to the road, was actually a toll house. There was a toll bridge there, and it's a feature that defines toll houses and also a lot of houses on canals and on railways as well, because you look both ways for traffic coming both ways. Probably very, very old building that. Fine picture of Pool of Fuca waterfall. Isn't that a magnificent bridge? Absolutely fantastic. The amount of work that went into building that. It was a feature of this type of photography back in the day that you couldn't actually photograph running water very well because it wouldn't stand still long enough. You had to actually stand still for about 3 seconds, and it always comes out sort of white like that. Any moving water. That's it coming around. It's probably up by Crooks Lake. It's a real one of those. We can almost hear the whistle going.
Oh yeah, there.
Yeah, and there was another one over on the far side, the Lucan steam tram, but it hadn't a patch on ours. Wasn't as nice looking. The railways, as you know, the first railway came to Ireland, or was built in Ireland in 1834, the Dublin to Kingstown Railway. And it was a great success because around about us, just not too long before that, the great harbour had been built out there. So the town of Dunleary, as we know today, grew up around the harbour first of all, and the packet station, the mail roads, and the railway also. But even in the late 1850s, when this photograph was taken, there was still competition for the travellers, because this is the Dublin to Kingstown coach. It says so on the side of it there. And I'm just looking at again, you have a bit of class distinction, because if you paid a few bob extra, you could probably get inside. If not, you have to climb up on top in all sorts of weather, I suppose. But it must have been very awkward getting in and out of things with these tall hats on.
Tall hats, yeah.
But there's something very interesting going on down near the Carlisle Bridge. Just have a look down here. I'll show you a blow up with that now. Have a look at that. There's a flock of sheep being herded through the street there.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Now, it's not too long ago that was a common sight in Dublin. You'd see herds of cattle, herds of sheep being herded through the streets on market days from the cattle market and being herded down to the docks to be exported and what have you. But that's just a a typical example. And I find this very amusing that the driver is just walking along nonchalantly and so are the cattle. And a couple of kids bringing up the rear, probably shunting them on, and the tram driver there is probably doing his nut. He won't get out of the way. But again, as I say, that would have been up near the cattle market on the North Circular Road. There was also competition from a steamship line that ran between Kingstown and Dublin. This is part of a stereographic view from about 1859, 1860. There was a small steamship line ran between Kingstown and the Customs House Quay for a few years. It wasn't very successful because the railways were simply just encroaching all the time and taking more and more passengers. Although in its day there were about 6 vessels on the run, I think over a period of about 3 or 4 years, and then it just petered out. A lot of advertisements in the paper for it. The fare was 6pence, but they did have a lot of trouble with engines. As far as I know, that one was built in the place that is now the Liffey dockyard, and it's the Anna Liffey. If you blow it up more, you can actually see the name on the bell. There were a lot of other types of steamships that were day trippers, went for trips round the bay. Now there's one of them goes round the bay today, motor ship. I think it's called the St. Bridget, and it's a fabulous trip around. You can go around Lowth, down as far as Bray. But this was one called the Ireland's King. Now there were a lot of them over the years. I just selected about 4 or 5. The Ireland's King went from Customs House Quay from about 1890, overlapped up to about 1910, over a period of 20 years. Some of them were before that and some of them slightly after that. That was its own little tugboat that was used for turning it at the quay. But the fare on that for a run out into the bay, down as far as Dalkey and back, was a shilling. And I think on Saturdays or Sundays then they used to run an excursion out around Lamb Bay and down as far as Bray, up Dalkey Sound and back, 2 shillings. A meal thrown in and a brass band always. Wonderful to read the ads associated with them. That was another one there, the Duke of Abercorn. Now you can actually date that because you look at the lighthouse here on the end of the battery at Kingstown, as it still was then. It's been raised up. If you look at earlier photographs, it's about 2 metres lower. The light is nearly level with the wall. And mariners made so many complaints that they couldn't see the light. It was being obscured by the wall, certainly. So they raised it up about 1896. So that kind of conclusively dates that for you. That's one called the Aubrey. Again, left from Custom House Quay, out around the bay. And that one there is the most interesting one. This is an earlier one called the Mars. Because this belongs to the 1860s. And it used to go out around the bay for trips out around Lamb Bay, down to Bray, Kingstown. But it also went on trips from Kingstown to Wicklow, either as day trippers or carrying passengers. And it went off during the American Civil War and became a blockade runner. And as far as I know, it was captured, running stuff for the Confederacy. It did a couple of successful blockade runs until the Union Navy captured it in the Gulf of Mexico somewhere. I think it was subsumed into the Union Navy then and was used by them. And as far as I know, I'm open to contradiction on this. I think it resumed as a ferry somewhere in New York after the American Civil War. Just a shot of the railway line, a very early shot of the railway line along by Black Rock. This little complex here is called Vance's Harbour. I'm jumping from one thing to another, but essentially there's a bit of transport in most of what I'm showing you. Because I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that I have thousands of images and I just have to select a few for tonight, you know. So that little harbour is still there. You'll see it as you're going by on the Lewis. But there's a story about it, because there's 2 bridges, that one and the one that this photograph was taken off. Part of the deal that was worked out by the 2 people who owned that bit of land to allow the railway to run across it was that the railway company provided them with their own personal railway station, and that's it there. This was Harcourt Leas who ran the post office, and the man in this one was Lord Cloncurry, who lived in Morettimo House, which is just here, which is now gone. Black Rock House is still there. But this was a beautiful little complex, a little Doric temple there, cut granite was their bathing house, and there was a swimming pool here that they could put a gate across and keep the water in it. And I took photographs of that whole complex back in the early 1990s, and it was all still nearly intact, but it's all completely destroyed now. I've never seen a place so vandalised in all my life. You'd be ankle deep in syringes. I didn't think there were so many junkies in Blackrock, really. There must have been gallons and gallons of paint expended in graffiti, and bottles and cans up to your knees. It's absolutely shocking. It was a lovely little complex at one time. As I say, the little private railway station is now gone, but it's a hard place to get to, because you have to actually get down onto the seashore and walk across a very rocky bit of ground. There's private access to it from up here with the residents, but I wouldn't say many of them go down there somehow. That's a picture of the railway at Dalkey from one of the stereographic views, probably around 1860, because at that stage Sorrento Terrace here had been built. There's an interesting feature on the Martello Tower and the battery over there. It's also interesting that they had these type of sleepers and tie bars. They had a lot of problems early on with the railway. They had it laid on granite blocks, then they had it laid on gravel, until they ultimately settled on wooden sleepers. But this was from before that, and as you can see, it's only a single line. But that photograph there was probably taken on the same day. And as you can see, the Martello Tower, the guns are still on the Martello Tower. And you can see one of the 36-pounders on the battery at the south end of the island. Plus the fact that the roof over the magazine is still intact. Again, that has been very, very badly vandalised, that battery down there. Pieces thrown down off it, needlessly. And just a story about that. I'll just show you the tower there. That's a blow up of the tower with the guns still on it. They were on sliding, revolving carriages that went around and had a commanding arc of fire from any direction. And all the arcs of fire of these batteries overlapped the towers and the batteries. During the Crimean War, the French could see how strong they were militarily, and it was a great age of colonialism. The world was literally up for grabs in a colonial sense, and the French decided they wanted their share. So there was a massive rearmament program, and the British feared that it might be around too of the Napoleonic Wars, because there was a huge arms race ensued when all the great big warships started to be built, like HMS Warrior, and the French built La Gloire that started the whole thing off. So all of the Martello Towers at that time were rearmed, or remanned I should say. They had been abandoned before that, and some of them remained manned up till the 1880s. Back to trams again. Cartload of coal crossing behind the tram, because he's going that way. But have you look at these symbols up here. The symbols were put there for each different destination. There was a different symbol. And somebody succinctly explained why they were there, for the benefit of the illiterate, people who couldn't read. So that's another tram there, and you can see there were round balls on the previous one. That's Strand Road, and that's the Sandymount tram has these crescent-shaped symbols on it. I'll have to do a part 2 of this, or even a part 3 of this talk, and I'll tell you about that structure there, as you can see in the distance on Sandymount. That's Sandymount Baths, but there was a great big pier, something like a miniature Brighton pier, with all kinds of amusements, and a bandstand and everything else on it, and dressing rooms on it in the 19th century, up to the 1920s in fact. But I found out what this person here did. They were simply a crowd that went around collecting empty bottles. There was money in empty bottles back then. Amazing how you can make a living out of that. And that's what we used to call a go-car. We call them buggies now. But anyway, there's the symbols there. That's the one we were looking at there with the crescent. And the one with the round ball on it, Nelson's Pillar to Palmerstown Park. A photograph of Trinity College with the military guard on the Bank of Ireland, which apparently persisted right up to the latter days of the British. There was always a military guard on the bank. And Christchurch Cathedral, before it was restored, when there's no steeple on it, as far as I know, it was restored by one of the great whisky companies in Dublin. It might have been Rose Distillery, I'm not sure. But they completely restored the cathedral.